When SJaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, stands at the United Nations, he does not just represent one nation's voice, he represents the spirit, the resilience, and the dignity of more than 1 billion people who believe in their sovereignty. In the case of Turkey's repeated remarks on India's internal matters, particularly Kashmir, Jaishankar's response was not just a rebuttal, it was an epic takedown. A reminder to the world that India will never allow another nation to lecture on issues that belong solely to its own people. His tone was measured, his words were sharp, and his intent was unmistakably India's sovereignty is not up for debate. Jaishankar's strength lies not in dramatic gestures, but in the power of calm conviction. He doesn't need to shout to command attention, he uses facts, history, and international law as his arsenal. At the UN, when Turkey attempted once again to bring up Kashmir, Jaishankar firmly reminded the Assembly that Turkey has no standing to interfere in India's domestic affairs. He made it crystal clear that the Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir was, and will always remain an integral part of India. This was not merely rhetoric for applause, it was a reaffirmation of India's constitutional reality and its unshakable position. In moments like these, leaders face a choice: ignore the remarks and let them fade into the background, or confront them head-on and set the record straight for the world to see. Jaishankar chose the latter, because in international diplomacy silence can sometimes be misinterpreted as acceptance. By directly responding to Turkey, he drew a bold line, one that said India will engage with the world, but not at the cost of its sovereignty. This clarity is what makes his responses epic, because there is no room left for confusion, no window for misinterpretation. What gives Jaishankar's words weight is not just his position, but the credibility India has built on the global stage. India has consistently upheld democratic values, international law, and peaceful coexistence. Turkey, on the other hand, has often been criticized for interfering in regional conflicts and using international forums to push its own political agendas. Jaishankar exposed this contrast without even needing to mention it outright. By defending India's sovereignty with calm authority, he let the world itself draw the comparison. Think about the symbolism of such a moment at the United Nations. The UN is a place where every country, big or small, has a seat. It's a forum meant for cooperation and respect. Yet, when a nation like Turkey chooses to misuse this platform to target another country's internal policies, it undermines the very spirit of diplomacy. Jaishankar's takedown, therefore, was not just about defending India, it was about restoring balance in the room. It was about reminding everyone that the UN cannot become a stage for one nation's political theatrics against another. The strength of Jaishankar's words also came from the confidence that India today is not the India of the past. Economically strong, diplomatically respected, and militarily prepared, India no longer has to quietly accept outside commentary on its internal matters. His speech reflected a new India, one that is proud of its identity and unwilling to compromise on its territorial integrity. The message to Turkey and to any other country considering similar provocations was loud and clear: we will not be lectured, we will not be dictated to, and we will not tolerate interference. At the same time, Jaishankar's approach was not reckless or aggressive. He did not attack Turkey in a personal or undiplomatic way. Instead, he relied on reason, legality, and principle. That balance is what makes his style so powerful. He demonstrated that you can be firm without being hostile, clear without being disrespectful, and uncompromising without being confrontational. This is the hallmark of true statesmanship. The epic nature of his takedown lies in the fact that it was more than a defense, it was a lesson. It was a moment where he reminded Turkey, and the entire world, that respect among nations is built on mutual non-interference. If India does not comment on Turkey's internal issues, then Turkey should extend the same courtesy. This simple principle of reciprocity is the foundation of global diplomacy, and Jaishankar ensured it was not forgotten. When India speaks today, the world listens differently than it did a few decades ago. That is why Jaishankar's defense of India's sovereignty resonates so deeply. He is not just speaking to Turkey. He is speaking to every country that might be tempted to raise questions about India's internal matters. His message was one of deterrence: try it if you will, but know that you will be answered, and answered with authority. Beyond the immediate context, Jaishankar's words also inspire ordinary Indians. For decades, people in India have watched foreign leaders make statements on their nation's issues, sometimes with little response from Indian officials. But today, they see a leader who will not let any comment pass unchallenged. This boosts national pride, because citizens feel represented, defended, and respected at the highest level. In many ways, this is what diplomacy is all about, not just managing relationships with other nations but also reinforcing the confidence of your own people. The fact that Jaishankar's response is described as an epic takedown speaks volumes. He did not engage in drama, he did not exchange insults, he did not prolong the argument. What he did was far more effective. He delivered a few precise lines that carried the weight of India's history, its constitution, and its future aspirations. That is why it struck such a chord, to show that true power lies not in volume but in conviction, not in aggression but in clarity, not in showmanship but in substance. India's sovereignty, in his words, is non-negotiable. This statement may sound simple, but in international relations, simplicity backed by strength is the most powerful stance. By asserting it at the UN, Jaishankar ensured that the message is now part of the global record. Every diplomat, every delegate, every observer heard it, and none can claim ignorance. That permanence is what makes this defense of sovereignty timeless. So when Jaishankar spoke, it was more than just a rebuttal to Turkey. It was a declaration that India has come of age on the world stage, and it will speak up whenever its dignity is questioned. It was a reminder that sovereignty is not just a legal term. It is the soul of a nation, and no nation that values its freedom will allow that soul to be attacked. Through his epic takedown, Jaishankar defended not just India's borders but also the pride of every Indian watching around the world. When SJaishankar addresses the world, he does not merely represent India's policies, he represents the logic of fairness and the expectation of consistency that every nation deserves. At the United Nations, when Turkey once again raised its voice against India, Jaishankar did not simply reject the interference, he exposed the hypocrisy behind such statements. In doing so, he reminded the world that diplomacy cannot be built on double standards, and that nations that do not respect the sovereignty of others cannot claim the moral high ground in international forums. His words carried the force of truth because hypocrisy, when exposed, has no defense. The hypocrisy in Turkey's remarks was plain to see. Here was a country that has its own complicated internal issues, conflicts with neighbors, and a history of questionable interventions in regional matters, yet it chose to lecture India on how to manage its internal affairs. This contradiction was not lost on Jaishankar, and with his sharp diplomacy, he turned that contradiction into a powerful counterattack. Without shouting, without grandstanding, he revealed the irony of the situation, that those who fail to practice respect at home or in their region have little credibility when trying to preach to others. Jaishankar's approach to exposing hypocrisy was not about insult, it was about precision. He highlighted that India does not turn on politics, its treatment of minorities, or its foreign entanglements. By maintaining this principle, India demonstrates respect for sovereignty. So, if India respects Turkey's sovereignty, why should Turkey not extend the same respect to India? That was the unspoken but unmistakable challenge Jaishankar laid before the assembly. The hypocrisy of selective respect was made visible, and in that moment, Turkey's words lost their weight. In international relations, credibility is everything. A nation that applies one standard to itself and another to others quickly loses the trust of the world. Jaishankar understands this deeply, and that is why he ensures that whenever India is unfairly targeted, the double standards are illuminated for all to see. At the UN, this becomes even more critical, because the world is watching. Delegates from every region sit and listen, and many of them may not know the full context of every dispute. By calmly exposing hypocrisy, Jaishankar not only defends India but also educates the world about the inconsistencies of those who seek to lecture others. Hypocrisy thrives in silence. If no one calls it out, it grows stronger, because false narratives begin to appear legitimate. Jaishankar refuses to allow that. When Turkey attempts to make Kashmir an international issue, he firmly brings the discussion back to the principle that every nation should handle its own internal matters. This principle is not just about India, it is a foundation of the global order. If one nation can openly interfere in another's affairs without challenge, then the entire system of sovereignty collapses. By confronting hypocrisy, Jaishankar is not only defending India but also defending the system that allows nations of all sizes to coexist with dignity. What makes his takedown effective is the restraint with which he delivers it. He does not need to catalog Turkey's internal challenges or conflicts, because that would reduce the discussion to mudslinging. Instead, he uses diplomacy to make the point India refrains from commenting on others, and it expects the same in return. In this way, he elevates the discussion above petty disputes and transforms it into a question of principle. This is how hypocrisy is dismantled. Not by trading insults, but by exposing the inconsistency in values and practices. There is also a moral force behind Jaishankar's words. India has always stood for respecting boundaries, for not interfering in the domestic policies of other nations, and for seeking peaceful coexistence. Turkey's behavior, in contrast, often appears opportunistic, using platforms like the UN to push political narratives that suit its interests. When Jaishankar highlights this contrast, it is not just about defending India's position. It is about pointing out that the credibility of international forums is undermined when some nations misuse them for selective outrage. Hypocrisy, in this sense, is not just a problem for India but a problem for the integrity of the UN itself. By taking down hypocrisy, Jaishankar also sets an example for other nations facing similar challenges. There are many countries that suffer from the double standards of larger or more vocal powers. They watch how India handles these situations, and they find inspiration in Jaishankar's firm but respectful style. He gives smaller nations a roadmap. You do not need to be aggressive to defend your sovereignty, but you must be clear, consistent, and willing to call out contradictions. His speeches, therefore, resonate far beyond India and Turkey. They speak to every country that values fairness in international relations. It is worth noting that hypocrisy, when left unchallenged, shapes narratives. If Turkey's repeated remarks on Kashmir were ignored, they could gradually plant seeds of doubt among neutral nations. But by confronting them openly, Jaishankar prevents falsehoods from taking root. He forces the world to see the reality, that these are politically motivated remarks, not genuine concerns about human rights or international peace. This act of exposure dismantles propaganda and protects the truth from being overshadowed by repeated lies. In many ways, Jaishankar's ability to expose hypocrisy is rooted in his understanding of history. He knows that India, once dismissed or ignored on the global stage, now stands as a voice of reason and strength. He knows that in the past, nations could attack India's positions without expecting a strong reply, but today the situation is different. Today, India has both the confidence and the standing to respond immediately, and to respond in a way that cannot be ignored. This shift in posture is itself a message to the world that the era of tolerating hypocrisy silently is over. The epic quality of his takedown comes from the balance of sharpness and dignity. He exposes the hypocrisy without losing composure, he points out the contradiction without indulging in hostility, and he defends India without undermining the principles of diplomacy. This balance is rare in international politics, and it is why his words echo far beyond the walls of the UN. They remind the world that truth, when spoken calmly and firmly, has a power greater than any insult or accusation. At the heart of Jaishankar's response is a commitment to consistency. If India will not comment on Turkey's internal affairs, then Turkey has no legitimacy in commenting on India's. That simple, consistent application of principle strips hypocrisy of its disguise. It leaves Turkey's words exposed as political maneuvering rather than genuine concern. In that exposure lies the real victory, because once hypocrisy is revealed, it cannot regain credibility. The audience sees the truth, and the narrative collapses under its own contradictions. This is why Jaishankar's speech at the UN was not just a defense of India, but an act of global leadership. By exposing hypocrisy, he defended not only his nation but the very idea that international forums should be governed by fairness and mutual respect, not by selective targeting or double standards. His takedown was epic because it reminded the world that truth, when spoken with clarity, always outshines hypocrisy, no matter how loudly it tries to disguise itself. When SJaishankar speaks at the United Nations, it is not just an Indian diplomat responding to a challenge, it is India presenting itself to the world with dignity, confidence, and maturity. His words are chosen carefully, his tone measured, but the impact is undeniable. In his epic takedown of Turkey's comments, what stood out was not just the defense of sovereignty or the exposure of hypocrisy, but the way he reinforced India's global standing without compromising on grace. Dignity is the hallmark of India's diplomacy, and Jaishankar embodies it with every statement he makes. For decades, India has worked to establish itself as a responsible, credible, and respected voice in international affairs. That position was not handed over easily. It was earned through years of consistent engagement, peaceful policies, and principled stands. Jaishankar knows this history well, and every time he addresses the world, he draws from it. By refusing to descend into petty exchanges with Turkey, he demonstrated that India does not need to trade insults to assert its position. Instead, it can stand tall, make its point with clarity, and allow the world to recognize its authority through dignity. Reinforcing global standing requires more than just rebutting attacks. It requires showing the world that India is guided by principles, not by emotion or provocation. When Turkey attempted to raise Kashmir at the UN, Jaishankar could have responded with a list of Turkey's own internal conflicts and shortcomings. He could have easily embarrassed Turkey with examples of its interventions in other countries, but he chose not to. Instead, he simply reminded the world that India's internal matters are not open to discussion. That restraint, that refusal to engage in a shouting match, is exactly what elevates India's global standing. It shows that India is secure in its position and does not need to waste its energy on pettiness. What makes this approach powerful is that it appeals not only to India's allies but also to neutral countries observing the exchange. Nations around the world respect consistency and composure. They see in India a country that does not react out of anger but responds with reason. This is particularly important in the modern world, where international trust is fragile and credibility is easily lost. By keeping India's dignity intact, Jaishankar reassures the world that India is a reliable partner, one that will not allow temporary provocations to dictate its policies or its tone. Dignity is also about representing the values of your people. India is the world's largest democracy, home to countless cultures, languages, and traditions. When its leaders speak, they carry the responsibility of reflecting that diversity and pride. Jaishankar's words at the UN reflected not just the government's position but also the confidence of a nation that has embraced its identity on the global stage. Every Indian watching him could feel that he was not just countering Turkey, he was presenting India as a dignified power that commands respect, not demands it. Reinforcing India's global standing with dignity also means reminding the world of India's contributions. India is not a country that seeks conflict. It is a nation that has consistently contributed to global peacekeeping missions, humanitarian aid, and development projects. When Jaishankar stands at the UN, the weight of this history adds to his authority. He does not need to brag about India's achievements, but his calm assurance reminds everyone that India has earned its seat at the table through positive action, not through coercion or interference. By maintaining dignity, Jaishankar also ensures that India is seen as a leader among developing nations. Many countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America face the challenge of being targeted by selective criticism in international forums. They watch how India handles these moments, and they see an example worth following. India does not bow down, nor does it lash out, it simply asserts its position firmly and respectfully. This balance allows India to be both a role model and a spokesperson for nations that desire fairness in global governance. Jaishankar's speech, therefore, was not just about India versus Turkey. It was about India reinforcing its leadership role in the wider global south. The essence of dignity is self-respect, and that was evident in every line Jaishankar delivered. He spoke as a representative of a country that no longer feels the need to justify itself to others. India has the economic strength, the technological advancement, and the diplomatic credibility to stand on its own. His words carried the quiet assurance of a nation that knows its worth. When you know who you are and what you stand for, you don't need to shout to be heard. This is why his takedown of Turkey was so effective. It was not about humiliation, it was about affirmation. Affirmation of India's position, India's sovereignty, India's dignity. It is also important to recognize that dignity is a long-term strategy. Countries that engage in undignified behavior may win short-term attention, but they lose long-term respect. India, by contrast, has been building a reputation for decades, and leaders like Jaishankar safeguard that reputation by refusing to compromise on dignity. At the UN, when Turkey tried to provoke, Jaishankar ensured that India's image as a serious, principled power remained intact. That image is critical because in the coming years, India's role in shaping global decisions will only grow, and respect will be its strongest currency. What the world witnessed in Jaishankar's response was the maturity of a rising power. He reminded Turkey, and indirectly the world, that India is not a country to be spoken down to or dismissed. But he did it without theatrics, without aggression, and without bitterness. That is how global standing is reinforced, not through loud confrontations but through calm demonstrations of strength. His words showed that India is not insecure. It is not desperate for validation, and it is not afraid of criticism. Instead, it faces challenges with composure and emerges stronger each time. This dignity also resonates with Indians at home. Citizens watching their foreign minister stand at the UN felt a sense of pride, because they saw themselves represented with honor. Too often, people expect international diplomacy to be full of compromises and cautious words. But Jaishankar proved that dignity does not mean silence, and strength does not require aggression. He struck a balance that made Indians proud of their country standing in the world. That pride, in turn, strengthens the nation's unity and resolve. Ultimately, reinforcing India's global standing with dignity is about shaping how the world perceives India for generations to come. The epic takedown of Turkey was not just a momentary victory in a diplomatic exchange. It was part of a larger narrative that India is building. A narrative of a nation that is strong, sovereign, and principled, but also gracious and respectful. Jaishankar's words carried that narrative forward, showing that India will not only defend itself but will do so in a way that elevates its stature in the eyes of the world. That is why his response was more than a defense. It was a projection of India's identity. It told the world that India's rise will not be marked by arrogance or hostility but by dignity. And in a world often divided by aggression and hypocrisy, dignity is not weakness, it is the highest form of strength.